In the pantheon of the great market legends, most figures are masters of a specific art, the art of speculation, the science of analysis, the discipline of a system. They are experts at playing the game of the market as it is presented to them. But there are a rare few who transcend this role. They are not interested in merely playing the game. They seek to own the board, to rewrite the rules, and to bend the very infrastructure of the economy to their indomitable will. Cornelius Vanderbilt was the archetype of this figure. He was not a financier in the modern sense. He was an empire builder, a man of raw, elemental ambition who viewed the stock market not as an arena for speculation, but as a tool, a weapon, to be used in his relentless quest for control and domination. His story is the quintessential American saga, a journey from dirt-poor beginnings to a level of wealth so vast it dwarfed the holdings of the United States Treasury itself. He was born before the invention of the steamship and died in the age of the transcontinental railroad, and his life was the driving force behind much of that transformation. He possessed no formal education beyond the age of 11, a fact in which he took a certain pride, for it reinforced his absolute and unwavering faith in his own judgment, his own brute logic, and his own instincts. While other men debated theories in boardrooms, Vanderbilt was on the deck of a ship, in the dirt of a construction site, personally ensuring his vision was being executed with ruthless efficiency. He was a force of nature, a man contemporaries described as a tempest of energy and resolve. He did not ask for permission, nor did he seek consensus. He saw a vulnerability in a competitor, and he attacked. He saw an opportunity for a monopoly, and he seized it. For him, business was not a gentleman's pursuit. It was war. And in that war, he was the supreme general. This video will deconstruct the life and the iron-willed philosophy of the Commodore. We will not be studying chart patterns or trading tactics. We will be studying a masterclass in raw capitalism, in strategic capital allocation, and in the art of using the market as an instrument to build a real physical empire of steam and steel. We will seek to answer the profound question: what were the fundamental, unbreakable principles of business warfare and wealth creation that allowed the uneducated son of a poor Staten Island farmer to become, for a time, the single richest and most powerful man in America? Before we continue, please subscribe and leave a quick comment, even one word. This small action helps the algorithm show this video to more people and tells me these deep dives are worth making. Cornelius Vanderbilt's 70-year ascent to the pinnacle of American capitalism began with a single audacious wager on himself. He was born in 1794 on Staten Island, New York, into a world where his future seemed preordained for a life of farming or manual labor on the waterfront. But from his earliest years, Vanderbilt possessed a restless energy and a burning ambition that could not be contained by the shores of his small island. He saw the bustling waterways between Staten Island and the burgeoning metropolis of Manhattan, not as a barrier but as an opportunity, a highway of commerce dominated by slow, inefficient sailing vessels. At the age of 16, he made a proposition to his mother, Phoebe. If she would lend him $100 to purchase his own small sailing vessel, a two-masted boat known as a Ferry, he would in return plow and plant her rocky 8-acre field. It was a formidable task, but Vanderbilt, with his characteristic grit, accomplished it. This $100 loan was not a gift. It was the first investment in his vision, a wager on her son's legendary capacity for hard work. With his own boat, he launched a small ferry service, transporting passengers and cargo. From the very first day, the core principles of his future empire were on full display. His work ethic was relentless. He would work from dawn until well after dusk in any weather, earning the nickname the Commodore for his skillful seamanship. His focus on efficiency was absolute. He ensured his boat was the fastest and his schedule the most reliable, often sleeping on the vessel to be ready for the earliest customers. And he was a master of reinvestment. Every dollar of profit was not spent on comfort or leisure, but was immediately plowed back into his business, saved for the purchase of bigger, better, and faster boats. It was during these early years that he learned the brutal but effective strategy that would become his lifelong doctrine: the price war. The waters around New York were controlled by entrenched monopolies, often granted by the state, who charged exorbitant rates. Vanderbilt, the young upstart, would enter a market, drastically undercut the established price, and offer a superior service. His overhead was lower, his efficiency was higher, and his tolerance for a fight was infinite. He could survive a price war far longer than his bloated, complacent competitors. Inevitably, the established power would be faced with a choice: face certain bankruptcy, sell their entire operation to Vanderbilt for a fraction of its worth, or most humiliatingly pay him a massive annual fee, a tribute, to simply take his ships and go away. He first perfected this tactic as a captain for Thomas Gibbons, who was fighting the powerful state-sanctioned steamboat monopoly held by Robert Fulton and Robert Livingston on the lucrative route between New Jersey and New York. Vanderbilt became the tip of the spear in this war, flouting injunctions, evading law enforcement, and relentlessly driving down prices. The conflict escalated all the way to the Supreme Court, resulting in the landmark 1824 decision in Gibbons versus Ogden, which broke the monopoly and opened the waterways to free competition, a competition Vanderbilt was uniquely positioned to win. He had learned his great lesson. Monopoly was the source of easy profits, and the fastest way to achieve it was through the ruthless application of financial force. He applied this doctrine with surgical precision up and down the East Coast, crushing competitors and consolidating his control over the region's most important shipping routes. By the middle of the century, the Commodore's ambition had grown from local ferries to a global stage. The discovery of gold in California in 1849 created an unprecedented demand for transportation from the East Coast to the West. The established route, run by the government-subsidized U.S. Mail Steamship Company, was a long, slow, and expensive journey across the Isthmus of Panama. Vanderbilt saw this not as an obstacle, but as another inefficient monopoly waiting to be broken. In a feat of breathtaking audacity, he created a competing route not through Panama, but through Nicaragua. His plan was a masterpiece of logistical engineering and calculated risk. It involved a steamship journey from New York to the coast of Nicaragua, a transfer to smaller riverboats to navigate the treacherous San Juan River and Lake Nicaragua, and finally a short 12-mile stagecoach ride to the Pacific coast, where another of his steamships would complete the journey to San Francisco. His route was faster, cheaper, and significantly more dangerous, but in the grip of gold fever, travelers flocked to it. His accessory transit company was a massive success, earning him millions. It was also here that he faced one of the greatest betrayals of his career. While he and his family were taking a long vacation in Europe, his own business partners, Charles Morgan and Cornelius Garrison, conspired against him, secretly selling off the company's stock and effectively stealing the entire operation from under him. Vanderbilt's response was a legendary declaration of war. He penned a famous, chillingly brief letter. "Gentlemen, you have undertaken to cheat me. I will not sue you, for the law is too slow. I will ruin you. Yours, Cornelius Vanderbilt." And he did. He immediately started a new, competing line, partnering with his old Panamanian rivals. He slashed his prices to the bone, starting a vicious price war against the very company he had created. He bled his former partners dry, driving their company into bankruptcy and reclaiming his dominance. The episode cemented his reputation as a man whose will was as unbendable as iron, and whose wrath was a force of financial nature. He had reached the absolute apex of the shipping world. From a single borrowed boat, he had built a global transportation empire and had become one of the richest men in America. But as he entered his late 60s, he saw that the world was changing. The future, he realized, was not on the water. It was on the rails. By the early 1860s, Cornelius Vanderbilt had reached an age when most men of great fortune would be content to retire to their estates, counting their dividends and reflecting on a life of achievement. He was nearing 70 years old, the undisputed king of American shipping, a titan whose name was synonymous with maritime power. He was the Commodore, and his empire of steamships was the envy of the world. But Vanderbilt's mind was not built for quiet retirement. It was a restless, forward-looking engine perpetually scanning the horizon for the next great opportunity, the next great battle. And as he looked at the state of the nation, then embroiled in the chaos of the Civil War, he saw with a clarity that few of his contemporaries possessed that the future of American power and commerce no longer lay on the water, it lay on the rails. He saw the war accelerating the strategic importance of railroads for moving troops, supplies, and industrial goods with a speed and efficiency that ships could never match. He understood that while steamships could connect a nation to the world, only the railroads could truly bind the vast continent together, turning a collection of disparate states into a single, cohesive economic powerhouse. The era of steam and sail was ending, and the age of iron and steel was dawning. In an act of breathtaking strategic foresight and unsentimental logic, Vanderbilt made the single greatest capital allocation decision of the 19th century. He decided to pivot. This was not a gradual shift or a diversification. It was a total and ruthless liquidation. Systematically, he began to sell off his entire magnificent steamship empire, the very source of his fortune, his power, and his identity as the Commodore. He sold his profitable ferry lines, his great transatlantic vessels, and his interests in the California routes. He was converting his physical empire into a massive liquid war chest of capital, preparing to launch a second career in an industry he knew little about but whose future he saw with absolute certainty. It was a move of supreme self-confidence, a declaration that his genius was not tied to any one industry, but to the timeless principles of consolidation, efficiency, and domination. His new campaign began not with the great trunk lines of the nation, but with a small, struggling, and widely disdained railroad, the New York and Harlem. On the surface, it was an unattractive investment. The line was poorly managed, and its stock was a plaything for cynical Wall Street speculators. But Vanderbilt, with his unique strategic eye for infrastructure, saw what no one else did. The Harlem was the only railroad that possessed a set of tracks running directly into the heart of downtown Manhattan, terminating near City Hall. This, he knew, was an asset of incalculable future value. He began to quietly and methodically accumulate its stock, taking control of the company, joining its board, and immediately applying his signature principles, improving service, upgrading equipment, and running the operation with ruthless efficiency. As the Harlem's fortunes improved under his hand, its stock price began to rise. This attracted the attention of a familiar cast of characters on Wall Street, chief among them his old rival, Daniel Drew. Drew and a circle of speculators, seeing the stock's ascent, decided it was ripe for a fall. They believed they had an unbeatable advantage. They had bribed the members of the New York City Common Council to pass a resolution revoking the Harlem's valuable franchise to run its streetcars on Broadway. They reasoned that this news would cause the stock to collapse, and they began to sell it short in massive quantities. They had made a fatal error. They had mistaken Vanderbilt for an ordinary investor. When the news broke and the stock began to plummet, Vanderbilt did not panic. He did not sell. Instead, with the cold calm of a master strategist, he saw the trap for what it was and began his counterattack. He instructed his brokers to buy every single share of Harlem stock that was offered for sale. As the shorts, led by Drew, dumped more and more shares onto the market, Vanderbilt's agents quietly absorbed them all. He then made his checkmate move. He went to the higher political power of the state legislature in Albany, a body he knew was also for sale, and with a series of well-placed and substantial bribes, he had them pass a bill that not only overruled the city council, but solidified the Harlem's franchise in perpetuity. The news hit Wall Street like a thunderclap. The stock price did not just recover, it exploded, rocketing to unheard-of levels. Daniel Drew and his fellow shorts were now trapped in a perfect corner. They were legally obligated to buy back the shares they had sold, but there were no shares to be bought. Cornelius Vanderbilt owned them all. He now held their financial lives in his hands, and he showed no mercy. He squeezed them relentlessly, forcing them to buy back their shares at a ruinous price of $179 a share, a move that cost Drew a reported $1 million and cemented Vanderbilt's reputation as a man who would and could destroy anyone who dared to bet against him. He had masterfully used the stock market as a weapon of financial warfare. The conquest of the Harlem was just the opening salvo in his grand campaign. His true vision was to consolidate the fragmented and inefficient railroad network of New York into a single dominant system under his absolute control. He next took aim at the Hudson River Railroad, a key competitor. He accumulated its stock, took control, and then turned his sights on the great New York Central, the powerful line that connected Albany to the western hub of Buffalo. When the Central's board initially rebuffed his takeover attempts, Vanderbilt demonstrated his power in a famously brutal fashion. The Central relied on Vanderbilt's Hudson line to transfer its passengers into New York City. In the dead of a freezing winter, Vanderbilt simply ordered that the connection between the two lines at Albany be severed, stranding thousands of passengers in the bitter cold. The public outcry was immense. The Central's stock plummeted, and its board was forced to capitulate. Vanderbilt took control, merging the lines to create the mighty New York Central and Hudson River Railroad, a seamless and monopolistic transportation behemoth that would become the crown jewel of his new empire. But one great rival remained: the Erie Railroad. The Erie was the New York Central's chief competitor, and Vanderbilt was determined to control it as well. This led to the second and even more epic Erie War. Vanderbilt began his usual tactic of buying up the stock on the open market, but this time his opponents were the triumvirate of Daniel Drew, Jay Gould, and Jim Fisk, a group even more cunning and less constrained by the law than he was. As Vanderbilt poured his millions into buying Erie stock, the Erie Ring simply fired up a printing press and manufactured tens of thousands of new illegal shares of watered stock, which they gleefully sold to the Commodore. He was a general laying siege to a fortress whose defenders could magically create new walls out of thin air. It was a battle he could not win. After being drained of millions and outmaneuvered both financially and politically, Vanderbilt was forced to admit defeat. It was a humbling lesson. The master of corporate warfare had been beaten at his own game, proving that in the lawless world of the Gilded Age market, there was always someone more ruthless waiting in the wings. Despite the loss, Vanderbilt's primary objective was achieved. By the end of the 1860s, he had completed his great pivot. He had transformed himself from a shipping magnate into the most powerful railroad baron in the country. He had demonstrated a new way of using the stock market, not as a venue for passive investment, but as a battlefield for achieving grand, strategic, industrial objectives. He was no longer just a businessman. He was a financial general, and he had built an empire to prove it. Having consolidated his absolute control over the railroad arteries of New York State, Cornelius Vanderbilt, now well into his 70s, embarked on the final grand project of his empire. His vision extended far beyond the borders of New York. He sought to create a single, seamless, and utterly dominant rail network that would connect the financial capital of the world, New York City, with the burgeoning industrial heartland of the American Midwest, terminating in the great commercial hub of Chicago. This was not merely a business expansion. It was an act of economic conquest, a private infrastructure project on a national scale. His method was a familiar and unstoppable combination of financial pressure and strategic acquisition. Using the immense profitability and power of his New York Central system as his base, he methodically moved west. He targeted the key connecting railroads, such as the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railway, engaging in the same tactics he had honed over a lifetime. He would accumulate their stock on the open market, wage ruthless price wars to weaken their financial position, and leverage his control of the critical New York interchanges to choke off their traffic until they were forced to capitulate. One by one, the independent lines fell under his control, becoming vassal states to his expanding empire. By the end of his campaign, he had forged the first great integrated railroad system in America, a steel artery that pumped goods and commerce between the coast and the heartland, with an efficiency the nation had never before seen. To commemorate this achievement and to create a physical monument to his power, Vanderbilt undertook his last great building project, the Grand Central Depot in New York City. This was not merely a train station, it was a cathedral of commerce, a testament in brick, iron, and glass to the Vanderbilt dynasty. With its massive arched train shed and its innovative design that brought the tracks underground, clearing the city's busy streets for the first time, it was an engineering marvel and the most magnificent transportation hub in the world. It was the physical heart of his empire, a grand gateway through which the wealth of a continent would flow, and it stood as an unambiguous declaration of who truly ruled American commerce. The principles that allowed Vanderbilt to achieve this unprecedented level of success were not complex trading rules, but a set of simple, brutal, and unbreakable laws for building an empire. First and foremost was a relentless focus on absolute operational efficiency. From his very first ferry, Vanderbilt was obsessed with running a faster, cheaper, and more reliable service than his competitors. He despised waste and constantly reinvested his profits into better and more modern equipment. Second was the unwavering pursuit of monopoly. He did not believe in healthy competition. He believed in total domination. His goal in every market he entered was to become the sole, undisputed provider of that service. Third, he viewed competition as a form of warfare. He saw business rivals not as peers, but as enemies to be financially annihilated. His primary weapon was the price war, a tool he used with surgical and merciless precision to bleed his opponents into submission or bankruptcy. And fourth, he understood that capital was a weapon for control. Unlike speculators who used their money to bet on the fleeting movements of a stock's price, Vanderbilt used his capital to acquire physical, controlling interests in the core assets of the American economy. He did not want to rent a piece of the game. He wanted to own the entire board. By the time of his death in 1877, Cornelius Vanderbilt had used these principles to become the richest man in America and arguably the world. His fortune was estimated to be over $100 million. To put that into perspective, it was a sum greater than all the currency held in the United States Treasury at the time. It represented an astonishing 1/87th of the entire nation's gross domestic product. In modern terms, this would be a level of relative wealth far exceeding that of any contemporary billionaire, a fortune measured in the trillions of dollars. His legacy, however, is as complex and controversial as the Gilded Age itself. On one hand, he was a visionary builder, a man of immense energy who created a more efficient, modern, and interconnected America. He built the infrastructure that fueled a century of economic growth. On the other hand, he was a ruthless monopolist who crushed his competitors, bribed politicians, and often held the public's interests in contempt, famously snarling, "What do I care about the law? Haven't I got the power?" He was the ultimate embodiment of the raw, creative, and destructive power of capitalism in its most untamed form. The story of Cornelius Vanderbilt is the ultimate lesson in capitalism as an act of pure, indomitable will. He was not a passive investor who reacted to the market's whims. He was a force of nature who imposed his vision upon markets and industries. He was not a trader of stocks, but a collector of companies, a grand strategist who saw the ticker tape not as a source of speculation, but as a path to total control. His life proves that with enough ambition, discipline, and a ruthless focus on a singular goal, one person can indeed bend the arc of economic history. The world of financial markets is vast, and there is no single path to mastery. Today we have dissected the empire-building strategy of Cornelius Vanderbilt. But do not forget the other great schools of thought. The art of speculation and tape reading from Jesse Livermore. The analysis of market structure and the actions of smart money from Richard Wyckoff. And the deep understanding of time cycles from William Delbert Gann. Each of them offers a unique and powerful perspective on the market. All links to the channels for their in-depth study can be found in the description of this video.